The strangest promises are never spoken by people asking to be saved. They are spoken by those who already know what your future will cost. Before this story continues, remember one thing. Out on the frontier, storms did more than drown cattle and tear roofs from cabins. Sometimes, they carried strangers into your life. And sometimes, those strangers became the only reason you survived the years that followed. The sky above Red Basin turned black long before sunset. Cole Walker had lived in the Wyoming Territory long enough to know the language of storms. The wind changed first. Then the birds vanished. Then the horses lifted their heads in uneasy silence, their ears twitching toward the distant mountains where thunder rolled like wagons crossing hollow earth. He tightened the leather straps on the flour sacks behind his saddle. He should have been home already. Instead, he urged his bay horse across the open prairie, hoping to outrun the wall of rain racing toward him. He never did. The first blast of wind hit hard enough to send sand slicing across his face. The second nearly threw him from the saddle. Within minutes, daylight disappeared beneath a curtain of rain so dense the world became little more than shadows and noise. Lightning cracked somewhere ahead. For a heartbeat, the valley flashed white. That was when he saw her. A horse. No rider. The terrified animal burst through the rain with its reins dragging behind, disappearing into the darkness before Cole could even reach for it. His instincts told him to keep riding. Whoever had lost that horse was already beyond saving. But another flash split the clouds. This time he noticed something lying beside a swollen creek. A hand, barely visible beneath tangled branches carried by the flood. Cole cursed under his breath. Without thinking, he threw himself from the saddle. The freezing current slammed against his legs the instant he stepped into the water. Another surge nearly swept him away. He fought forward anyway. Branches scraped his arms. Mud sucked at his boots. Then his fingers found fabric. Not wool. Buckskin. He pulled with everything he had. The current resisted as though unwilling to surrender. Its prize. Finally, a woman emerged from the rushing water, limp against his shoulder. Long black hair clung to her face. Rain streamed across skin the color of burnished copper. Her breathing was shallow. A deep cut marked one side of her forehead. Cole wrapped his coat around her before lifting her onto higher ground. He never asked her name, never searched her pockets, never wondered whether she belonged to a tribe that might reward him or punish him. To him, a dying person was simply a dying person. The abandoned ranger cabin stood less than half a mile away. By the time he forced the swollen door open, both of them were soaked to the bone. He built a fire with trembling hands. Smoke curled slowly toward the broken roof, while thunder continued to shake the valley outside. Hours passed. The storm refused to leave. Near midnight, the woman finally stirred. Her eyes opened quietly. Dark. Steady. Far too calm for someone who had nearly drowned. She looked around the cabin without panic. Then her gaze settled on Cole. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Cole simply handed her a tin cup filled with warm water. You should drink. She accepted it without lowering her eyes. You saved me, she said softly. Cole shrugged. Anyone would have. A faint smile crossed her lips. No. She studied him as though recognizing something he had not yet discovered about himself. Outside, the wind howled through the pines. Inside, the fire snapped gently between them. Then she spoke the words that would follow Cole Walker for the rest of his life. You think you saved me from the storm. She paused. But one day, her voice became almost a whisper. You'll understand why you need a woman like me. The woman did not touch the fire until the wind outside began to fade. She sat quietly near the far wall of the abandoned ranger cabin, wrapped in Cole Walker's heavy coat, watching the flames instead of the man who had carried her out of the flooded creek. Most people filled silence with questions. She seemed to trust it more than words. Morning arrived slowly. Gray light slipped through the broken roof, revealing a land washed clean by the night's violence. Fallen branches littered the valley. The creek had doubled in size. Steam drifted from soaked earth as the first rays of sunlight pushed away the storm. Cole saddled his horse without speaking. He packed what remained of his flour, coffee, and dried venison into the worn saddlebags, leaving half the food beside the woman. You'll need it, he said. She looked at the supplies, then back at him. So will you. I've lived with less. I can see that. There was no mockery in her voice. Only observation. Cole finally studied her in daylight. She appeared no older than 28. Long black hair fell over one shoulder, still damp from the river. The scar above her eyebrow looked older than the wound from the storm, as though hardship had introduced itself to her years before yesterday's flood. Around her neck hung a small leather cord. Nothing more. No silver. No beads. Just a single piece of smooth river stone worn by time. You have a name? Cole asked. She hesitated. Nayeli. He nodded once. Cole Walker. She repeated his name quietly, almost as though testing whether it belonged to the man standing before her. Cole Walker. Outside, a hawk circled above the valley. Nayeli followed its flight through the broken window. You should leave before noon. Cole frowned. The sky is clear. It won't stay that way. He glanced toward the mountains. Blue. Silent. No clouds. No second storm today. She looked at him for a long moment. Not from the sky. Something about the way she said it unsettled him. It wasn't mysterious. It was certain, as if she had already watched the day unfold somewhere beyond the horizon. Cole brushed the feeling aside. I'll take you back to your people. No. You know where they are? Yes. Then let's ride. No. This time the answer came harder. My people believe white men always arrive carrying promises they cannot keep. And what do you believe? Nayeli's eyes rested on the fire. I believe people show themselves before they speak. Cole let out a quiet breath. Then what have I shown you? She met his gaze again. You pulled a stranger from a river. You would have done the same. A faint sadness crossed her face. No. He blinked. No. My people would have asked who you were first. The words landed softly, but they carried the weight of generations. Cole looked toward the open door where sunlight stretched across wet grass. I didn't ask. I know, and I don't regret it. Neither of them noticed the fresh hoofprints outside. For horses, still wet from the storm, passing less than an hour earlier. The riders had stopped on the ridge, watched the cabin, then continued east, far enough away to disappear, close enough to know someone had survived the flood. Nayeli suddenly stood. Her eyes narrowed toward the distant hills. They've already found the trail. Cole followed her gaze, but saw nothing except empty prairie. Who's looking for you? She remained silent. The wind shifted, bringing with it the faint smell of smoke. Not from their fire, from somewhere farther west. Nayeli closed her eyes for only a second. When she opened them again, the calm woman from the night before was gone. In her place stood someone carrying the quiet discipline of a survivor. We leave now, she said. For your village? She shook her head. If we ride toward my people. She reached for the leather stone hanging around her neck. Everyone between us and them will die. They rode east until the ranger cabin disappeared behind a curtain of pine trees. Neither of them looked back. The morning had become strangely beautiful after the storm. Sunlight spilled across the wet prairie, making every blade of grass sparkle as though the earth had forgotten the violence of the night before. Wildflowers bent beneath drops of rain. Steam rose from black rocks warmed by the returning light. But beauty had never guaranteed safety on the frontier. Cole rode ahead. Nayeli followed several horse lengths behind, her posture relaxed but her eyes never still. She studied the ridges, the birds, the movement of tall grass, reading the land the way other people read books. After nearly an hour, she spoke. Slow down. Cole glanced over his shoulder. Why? The rabbits are gone. He frowned. So, they should be feeding. He looked across the valley. She was right. Not a single rabbit. No prairie dogs. Even the meadowlarks had vanished. Only the wind remained. Cole eased his horse to a slower pace. You notice everything. My grandmother taught me. What else did she teach you? Nayeli smiled faintly. That silence speaks before people do. The words lingered between them. They continued riding without another sentence. By midday, they reached a narrow wooden bridge crossing a deep ravine. Its weathered planks groaned beneath the wind. Cole guided his horse toward it. Stop. Nayeli's voice came sharp this time. He turned. What now? She dismounted without answering. Walking to the bridge, she crouched near one of the support beams. Her fingers brushed fresh wood dust scattered beneath the planks. Someone had sawed halfway through the main support. Not enough for the bridge to collapse immediately, only when enough weight crossed it. Cole felt his stomach tighten. If we'd ridden across, it would have broken. He stared at her. You knew. I hoped I was wrong. She stood, brushing sawdust from her hands. This wasn't done by weather. No, it was done by men waiting for someone. Cole scanned the canyon below. Nothing moved. Yet the back of his neck prickled with the feeling of unseen eyes. They turned south instead, following an older trail winding between towering cottonwoods. The detour cost them hours. Neither complained. Late in the afternoon, they reached a small spring hidden beneath smooth granite cliffs. Cole removed the saddlebags while Nayeli filled 2 water skins. For the first time since leaving the cabin, she looked almost peaceful. "You don't ask many questions," she said. "I stopped asking years ago." "Why?" "The answers usually hurt." She considered that. "My father used to say only wounded people stop asking questions." Cole poked at the campfire with a stick. "My father stopped talking before I was old enough to know him." "And your mother?" He stared into the flames. Buried beside him. The fire cracked softly. Nayeli lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry. So am I." Silence settled again. Not uncomfortable. Only honest. As dusk painted the cliffs with amber light, a shadow crossed the spring. Then another. Cole's horse suddenly jerked its head upward, nostrils flaring. Every muscle in the animal stiffened. Nayeli froze. "Don't move." "What is it?" She pointed toward the muddy edge of the water. A boot print. Large. Fresh. Then another. For men. No more than an hour ahead of them. Cole slowly rested one hand on the grip of his revolver. "They're close." Nayeli knelt beside one of the tracks. Her fingers traced its edge without touching it. "They're not hunting deer." She looked toward the distant ridge where the evening sun cast long shadows over the rocks. "They're hunting me." Cole waited for her to explain. Instead, she reached into the leather pouch tied beneath her shirt and pulled out a tightly wrapped bundle covered in oilcloth. For a brief second, the setting sun reflected against something hidden inside. Not gold. Not silver. Paper. Carefully folded papers. She wrapped them again before he could see more. "You asked this morning who was looking for me." Her voice had become almost a whisper. "They don't want me dead." She looked directly into his eyes. "They want what I'm carrying." A single rifle shot echoed somewhere beyond the ridge. Too far to hit them. Close enough to send a message. They had been found. The echo of the rifle shot lingered across the valley long after the sound itself had disappeared. Neither of them reached for words. Cole quietly stamped out the fire with the heel of his boot, while Nayeli tucked the oilcloth bundle back beneath her buckskin shirt. Whatever was hidden inside had become heavier than paper. It carried the weight of fear. "We move," Cole said. She nodded. They left the spring without looking behind them. The trail narrowed as it climbed into a forest of towering pines. Damp needles softened the sound of their horses, while shafts of evening sunlight slipped through the branches like pale ribbons. The smell of wet earth mixed with cedar and distant smoke. Every few minutes Nayeli glanced upward, not at the trees. Beyond them. Listening. Watching. Cole finally broke the silence. "How long have they been after you?" 5 days. "And you've been alone the whole time?" "Yes." "You never asked anyone for help?" "I learned a long time ago that asking the wrong person can be more dangerous than running alone." Cole understood that answer better than he wanted to admit. The trail curved around a rocky bluff before opening onto a narrow overlook. Below stretched miles of untouched wilderness. Far in the distance, a thin ribbon of smoke climbed into the evening sky. Nayeli stopped her horse. "That wasn't there yesterday. You know that." "I crossed this ridge yesterday." Cole studied the smoke. Too straight. Too steady. Someone had built a camp. Not a wildfire. A camp waiting for travelers. He looked back at her. "They're closing every road." She answered with only a slight nod. As darkness settled over the mountains, they found shelter beneath an enormous sandstone overhang where centuries of wind had carved a natural alcove. Cole gathered fallen branches while Nayeli searched quietly among the rocks. When she returned, she carried sage, wild onions, and a handful of mountain herbs. "You know plants too?" "My grandmother believed the earth speaks before medicine does." She crushed the herbs into a small tin cup, adding hot water from the fire. The scent drifted through the cool evening air. Sharp. Clean. Almost sweet. Cole accepted the cup. "You trust me enough to drink that?" A faint smile touched her face. "If I wanted to poison you." She looked at his untouched coffee pot. "I would have used yours." For the first time since they met, Cole laughed. Only once. Short. Quiet. But genuine. Something changed in the silence afterward. Not romance. Not yet. Simply the feeling that two lonely people had stopped being complete strangers. As the fire burned lower, Nayeli slowly removed the leather cord from around her neck. The smooth river stone rested in her palm. She rubbed it gently with her thumb before placing it beside the flames. Cole noticed strange marks carved into its surface. Not decoration. Symbols. Older than anything he had seen. My grandmother gave it to me. For protection? For remembrance. Of what? She stared into the fire. That every choice survives longer than the person who makes it. Cole looked away. His own father had once said something almost identical. The memory arrived so suddenly it caught him off guard. He had been 7 years old. His father sitting outside their cabin, repairing a saddle beneath the setting sun. A small leather pouch resting beside him. Then the memory vanished as quickly as it had come. Cole frowned. There had been something else. Someone visiting. Someone with long black braids. The sound of a snapping twig shattered the moment. Both of them froze. The horses lifted their heads. Another snap. Then silence. Cole reached for his revolver. Nayeli extinguished the fire with one sweep of dirt. Darkness swallowed the alcove. Neither breathed. Several long seconds passed. Then came the unmistakable sound of boots sliding carefully across loose gravel. Not one man. Several. Cole counted softly inside his head. 1, 2, 3. No. 4. A voice drifted through the darkness beyond the rocks. Calm. Confident. Almost friendly. Miss Redbird. The words froze Nayeli where she crouched. You've made this chase much longer than it needed to be. Cole turned toward her. He had never heard her family name before. Her expression told him something even more troubling. She knew exactly who was speaking, and she was more afraid of that man's voice than she had ever been of the storm. The silence after the confrontation carried more weight than the confrontation itself. Royce remained where he stood, saying nothing as the last echo of hoofbeats disappeared beyond the canyon walls. The wind moved gently through the sagebrush, lifting fine dust into ribbons of gold beneath the afternoon sun. Across from him, Nehemina watched with the guarded expression of someone who had spent a lifetime expecting every quiet moment to become another battle. Neither reached for a weapon. Neither looked away. At last, Nehemina bent down and picked up the turquoise amulet that had slipped from its leather cord during the struggle. She brushed the dust from its polished surface with remarkable care before holding it toward Royce. You should keep it. Royce shook his head. It stayed with your family longer than it stayed with mine. For a long moment, she simply studied him. Most men measured worth by ownership. Land, horses, gold, even people. Yet this cowboy kept giving away every chance to claim something for himself. That unsettled her far more than any rifle ever could. The canyon had returned to its natural sounds. A hawk circled overhead. Somewhere downstream, water rolled lazily across smooth stone. The world seemed almost unwilling to remember that only moments earlier suspicion had nearly become bloodshed. Nehemina turned toward the narrow trail leading deeper into Apache territory. You still want to deliver the medicine? I do. You know many there don't trust men who wear your hat. I've earned that. She looked back over her shoulder. But you'll come anyway. Royce smiled faintly. Sick children don't have time to wait for trust. The answer lingered between them. She began walking without another word. After several steps, she noticed the steady rhythm of boots following behind her. Not too close, never demanding, never hesitant. The distance he kept was neither fear nor pride. It was respect. As they crossed the canyon, the landscape slowly changed. Dry stone gave way to scattered cottonwoods. The air smelled of damp earth, cedar smoke, and distant cooking fires. Hidden lookouts observed every movement from the cliffs above. Royce never raised his eyes toward them. He knew they had already seen him. One whistle echoed. Then another. Signals passed invisibly across the valley. Nehemina heard them all. They know you're here, she said quietly. I figured. They're deciding whether you leave as a guest or not at all. Royce simply adjusted the medicine satchel across his shoulder. I didn't come for permission. No, she admitted. You came because someone needed help. For the first time since they had met, the hard edges around Nehemina's expression softened. Her grandmother had once told her that true strength rarely announced itself. It arrived quietly, carried no banner, demanded no applause, and left people questioning everything they believed about courage. Standing beside this silent rancher, she finally understood those words. Far ahead, thin columns of smoke rose above the trees. The village. Children would soon receive the medicine they desperately needed. Yet Nehemina sensed that the medicine was not the only thing crossing into Apache land today. Something far more dangerous had crossed the canyon. Respect. And once respect entered a place where hatred had lived for generations, no rifle, no border, and no old prejudice could ever force it to leave. The village appeared without warning, hidden so naturally among the cottonwoods that Royce almost rode past it before realizing people had been watching him for several minutes. Nothing moved openly, yet every doorway held a pair of patient eyes. Every rooftop carried the outline of someone quietly observing. Children who had been laughing only moments before disappeared behind woven blankets as Royce stepped through the entrance beside Nehemina. No one shouted. No one reached for a weapon. The silence itself became the welcome and the warning. The medicine satchel suddenly felt heavier on his shoulder, not because of its weight, because every heartbeat in the village seemed to depend upon what rested inside it. Nehemina stopped before the largest lodge. "Wait here." Royce nodded. He did not ask questions. He had learned that respect often sounded exactly like silence. Inside, low voices exchanged words in Apache too quickly for him to understand. Occasionally one voice rose with unmistakable anger before another answered with calm authority. The discussion lasted longer than Royce expected. Finally, the entrance flap opened. An elderly woman emerged first. Time had bent her back, but had failed to dim her eyes. They remained sharp, carrying the quiet certainty of someone who had witnessed enough sorrow to recognize truth without needing proof. She approached Royce slowly. Without speaking, she extended both hands. Royce placed the leather satchel into them. The old healer untied the straps and examined every bottle with practiced fingers. She uncorked one vial, smelled the herbs inside, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "Good medicine," she whispered in careful English. It was made by people who wanted strangers to live. She looked into Royce's face for another long moment before disappearing back inside. Only then did the tension across the village begin to ease. Children peeked around. Corners again. A young mother finally released the hand of her frightened son. Somewhere nearby, a horse snorted softly, breaking the silence that had gripped everyone since Royce arrived. Minutes later, a baby's cry drifted from the lodge. Then another. Soon after, the crying faded. The sound reached every family waiting outside. No celebration followed, only quiet relief. Several women lowered their heads in silent gratitude. One elderly man closed his eyes and whispered something toward the evening sky. Royce stood alone beneath the cottonwoods, pretending not to notice. He understood those moments belonged to them. Nehemina stepped outside carrying the now empty satchel. The fever has already begun to break. Royce released a breath he had not realized he had been holding. "That's enough." She studied him carefully. "You risked your life crossing a canyon where many wanted you dead. I crossed it because children were sick. You never once asked what you would receive." Royce smiled with the tired honesty of a man who had buried too many expectations years ago. "My mother used to say gratitude is a gift. It cannot be collected. It can only be given." The old healer appeared once more. This time she carried something wrapped in faded buckskin. The bundle was small enough to fit into one hand. She offered it to Royce. He hesitated. "I didn't come for payment." The old woman smiled. "No, you came because your heart remembered something your people forgot." She unfolded the buckskin. Inside rested an old silver compass, its glass cracked with age, its needle still turning faithfully toward the north. Royce stared. He recognized it instantly. "My father's." The healer nodded. "He left this here many winters ago. He said if his son ever found his way to this valley, he would already know the right direction." Royce's fingers closed around the weathered compass. The metal felt warm despite the evening air. Some journeys ended with gold. Others ended with answers. But Royce sensed, as the first stars appeared above the canyon, that this was not the end of his journey. It was only the moment when two histories, separated by fear for an entire generation, finally began walking the same trail. Royce expected to leave before sunrise. Instead, dawn brought 40 mounted warriors. They appeared one by one along the ridge, their silhouettes outlined against the pale morning sky. No war paint, no battle cries, only disciplined silence as they guided their horses into formation overlooking the valley. Royce paused while tightening his saddle. For a brief moment, every old story he had ever heard about frontier justice returned to him. He counted the riders, then stopped counting. The village behind him remained strangely calm. No one ran for cover. No one reached for a rifle. Nehemina stepped from the largest lodge, wearing the same quiet confidence that had unsettled him since the day they first met. "They're not here for you," she said. Royce looked toward the ridge. "It certainly feels that way." A faint smile touched the corner of her mouth. "They're here because of you." The oldest warrior among them urged his gray horse forward. His braided hair had turned almost entirely white, but nothing in the way he carried himself suggested weakness. Deep scars crossed one side of his face, each one earned long before Royce had ever been born. He dismounted without ceremony. The entire line of warriors followed. 40 pairs of boots touched the earth almost together. The old warrior stopped only a few steps away. Neither man spoke. The morning breeze carried the scent of cedar smoke through the valley while horses shifted patiently behind them. Finally, the elder reached beneath his buffalo hide cloak. Every instinct born from frontier life told Royce to prepare himself. Instead, the old man removed a folded strip of worn buckskin. He opened it carefully. Inside lay a single eagle feather tied with blue thread beside a small silver bead darkened by age. Nehemina lowered her head respectfully. "The feather of safe passage," she explained quietly. "It has not been given to an outsider in over 30 years. The elder lifted the feather with both hands. "Our children breathe because of medicine you carried." His English came slowly, shaped by years rather than schools. "You crossed our land without demanding reward. You respected our dead. You listened before speaking." He stepped closer. When a man protects life without asking who owns it, he no longer walks as a stranger. With steady hands, the elder fastened the feather beside Royce's hatband. No applause followed. No grand declaration. The simple gesture carried more honor than any medal a government could forge. Royce lowered his eyes. "I haven't earned this." The elder's weathered face softened. "That is exactly why you have." Silence settled once more. Then something unexpected happened. The 40 warriors stepped backward together. One by one, each placed a closed fist against his own chest before bowing his head. Not deeply, only enough for respect to speak louder than pride. Royce stood frozen. He had expected suspicion, perhaps tolerance. Never this. His father had once told him that trust on the frontier was built slower than mountains. Standing in the quiet valley, Royce finally understood. Trust was never won through victories. It was earned through restraint. Nehemina watched the scene without speaking. She remembered the terrified settlers who once crossed this canyon with rifles ready before asking names. She remembered young Apache children taught to fear every cowboy wearing dusty boots. This morning, neither lesson survived. The sun climbed above the eastern cliffs, washing the valley in warm gold. Its light touched white faces and Apache faces exactly the same. The old elder mounted his horse once again. Before turning away, he looked back toward Royce. "There will be others. Men who carry hatred instead of medicine. When they come, remember this valley." Royce rested one hand against the feather now secured beside his hat. "I will." As the 40 riders disappeared beyond the ridge, only drifting dust remained behind them. But something far greater stayed in the valley. Not an alliance, not a treaty, simply the quiet understanding that sometimes the strongest bridge between two worlds is built by one man willing to arrive with empty hands and leave carrying only respect. The first snow arrived 3 months later. It settled quietly across the canyon, softening every sharp edge the desert had carried through summer. The cottonwoods stood bare against a pale sky, their branches reaching upward like old hands remembering forgotten prayers. Royce returned alone, not because anyone had summoned him, simply because he had promised. The medicine satchel hanging from his saddle was lighter this time. Inside were fresh bandages, herbs from the settlement doctor, and several small wooden horses he had carved during long evenings beside his fire. He never mentioned them. Children deserved surprises that carried no explanation. As he crossed the familiar canyon, he noticed something unusual. No hidden watchers, no warning whistles. Only a single pair of footprints leading toward the village. Nehemina waited beside the frozen stream. She smiled before he could speak. "You found the trail." Royce glanced toward the untouched snow. "I didn't see anyone guiding me." "You didn't need to." She looked toward the distant ridge where the first rays of winter sunlight touched the cliffs. Some roads remember the people who walk them with respect. Together, they entered the village. This time, children did not hide. A little boy ran forward, stopping only long enough to stare at the feather still fastened beside Royce's hat. His small fingers pointed toward it. "You came back." Royce knelt until they stood eye to eye. "I said I would." The child nodded as though that alone explained everything. Behind him, mothers smiled. Old men raised quiet hands in greeting. Even the horses grazing nearby remained calm, recognizing a visitor who no longer carried the scent of fear. The old healer emerged slowly from her lodge. Age had stolen more of her strength since autumn, yet her eyes still held the same steady light. She motioned Royce closer. "My time grows short," she said softly. "There is something you should know." From beneath her blanket, she produced a folded piece of yellowed paper, protected inside oilskin despite the passing years. Royce unfolded it carefully. His breath caught. It was his father's handwriting, a letter never delivered. "If my son ever reaches this valley," the faded words read, "tell him I failed to build peace because I tried to win arguments instead of earning trust. If he learns anything from my mistakes, let him remember this." Royce's eyes lingered on the final sentence. No man changes the frontier by drawing the fastest gun. He changes it by becoming the first man willing to lower his hand. Silence settled over the lodge. Outside, snow drifted gently against the doorway. Royce folded the letter with trembling hands. For years he had believed his father disappeared, chasing adventure. Now he understood. The old man had stayed because he believed two worlds could one day speak without hatred. He simply had not lived long enough to see it happen. Nehemina stepped beside Royce. Neither reached for comfort. Neither needed words. The answer had already been written long before either of them was born. As Royce prepared to leave, the village gathered without anyone calling them. No ceremony. No speeches. Only quiet faces watching one rider mount his horse beneath a sky filled with falling snow. Royce touched the brim of his hat. The eagle feather moved gently in the winter wind. Then he turned toward the open plains. Behind him, the village slowly disappeared beneath white silence. Ahead lay a frontier still divided by fear, pride, and old wounds. But somewhere between those two worlds now rode one cowboy carrying no banner, no title, and no promise except the simplest one of all, to meet every stranger first with dignity. Because out on the frontier, justice was never born from louder voices or quicker hands. It was born in the quiet moments when one person chose compassion before judgment. And sometimes, that choice echoed farther than the sound of any gun ever could. Years later, travelers passing through that forgotten stretch of frontier would notice something unusual. No fence marked the boundary between the ranch and the canyon. No warning sign stood beside the trail. Only a weathered wooden post, carved by careful hands long ago. Its words were simple. "Leave your hatred here." Most riders smiled at the message. Some laughed. A few ignored it completely. Yet almost everyone slowed their horse before crossing into the valley. Perhaps because the place itself felt different. The wind carried no bitterness. The silence no longer sounded lonely. Even the horses seemed calmer beneath the towering cottonwoods. Royce Brook never became famous. No newspaper printed his name. No governor offered him a medal. No history book remembered the afternoon he chose to carry medicine instead of pride across a canyon divided by generations of fear. But stories have never belonged only to books. Sometimes they belong to old campfires, to weathered ranchers speaking softly beneath endless stars, to grandmothers who pause before finishing a tale because the silence explains more than the words. Children in nearby settlements grew up hearing about the quiet cowboy with the feather on his hat. Some believed he had been protected by Apache spirits. Others insisted 40 warriors once escorted him across the mountains without speaking a single word. The details changed with every telling. The truth never did. He respected people before asking who they were. That was enough. Nehemina led her people through years of difficult peace. There were still disputes, still misunderstandings, still men on both sides who preferred suspicion over conversation. History rarely changes all at once. It changes one decision at a time. Whenever tension threatened to grow into violence, she would sometimes remove an old silver compass from a cedar box inside her lodge. The cracked glass reflected the firelight exactly as it had on the day Royce first recognized it. She never used the compass to find north. She already knew where north was. She kept it to remember another direction entirely. The direction a human heart could choose. Many winters after the old healer had passed away, a young Apache boy asked Nehemina why a white man's feather still rested inside the tribe's council lodge. She looked toward the mountains before answering. Because courage should never belong to only one people. The boy nodded slowly. Years later, he repeated those same words to his own children. And so the lesson continued its quiet journey. Far beyond the valley. Far beyond the frontier. Far beyond the lives of those who first lived it. One spring morning, an aging Royce returned to the canyon for the final time. His hair had turned silver. The feather beside his hat had faded beneath years of sun and snow, yet it remained carefully tied in exactly the same place. He tied his horse beside the frozen stream where he had first met Nehemina. The water flowed gently now, older, calmer, much like the man watching it. Nehemina joined him without a sound. Neither spoke for a long while. They simply listened to the river. Finally, Royce smiled. It was never about crossing this canyon. She understood immediately. No, it was about crossing everything inside ourselves first. The afternoon light settled across the valley as two old friends stood together beneath the whispering cottonwoods. No speeches, no dramatic farewell, only quiet understanding. When Royce finally rode away, he did not look back. He did not need to. Some places become part of a man long before he leaves them. Long after his horse disappeared beyond the ridge, Nehemina remained beside the river. The breeze stirred the branches overhead. Somewhere high above, an eagle circled through the endless western sky. She watched until it vanished into the sunlight. Out here, justice had never belonged to the fastest draw. It belonged to those willing to lower their hands before raising their voices. Compassion had accomplished what rifles never could. Respect had traveled farther than fear. And in the great silence of the Old West, where dust eventually covered every footprint, one truth remained untouched by time. The strongest people are not remembered because they defeated their enemies. They are remembered because they taught strangers to stop becoming enemies at all.